Let me tell you, a lot of these A players that you're calling are so ADHD. They screw so many things up, but they still find a way to compensate for that. So, no, I'm not going to go that these guys have never made mistakes. I can talk to A players today, and they'll give me their list of mistakes.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, and welcome to today's show. On today's show, we have the legend that is Victor Antonio, one of my favorite guests to have on the show. And today's show, he's sharing what you can do if you're a struggling sales rep. Both, at the beginning of your career, the middle of your career, if you've plateaued a little bit, what you should do to improve on yourself, and then the point that you should give up as well, because that is an important one. Perhaps not even give up, perhaps make a change. You can find out more about Victor over at victorantonio.com. And with all that said, let's jump into today's episode. Hey, Victor, and welcome back to the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Will. Glad to be back.
You passed the test of being asked to return, so that just speaks to your credentials. And obviously, I enjoyed your company last time we chatted, and I know the audience got a lot out of it. So today, I want to take a slightly different turn on what we talked about last time, and I want to talk about it. I think it's going to sound like a negative conversation, but I think there's going to be huge positives to it for the end, for the Sales Nation people listening to this. So I just want to predicate this. It might start off sounding a bit doom and gloom, but there'll be loads of positive to come out the other side of it. And what we're going to talk about is saving the struggling sales rep. And I've been there because my first sales job in chemical sales, I still don't know to this day whether I was actually sacked or just asked very politely to leave. I just wasn't performing very well in the role. And then I went into medical devices and had some success. So that's probably a story for another time. But just to prerequisite the conversation of, I've been here. I've been in that position where your sales manager's going on at you and trying to push you forward, and there's gaps in your knowledge or whatever it is that's holding you back. So with all that said, how do we know, Victor, whether we are struggling in our sales role? What are the red flags that something isn't quite right here?
Okay, I mean, should we look at it from a personal standpoint or from a management standpoint?
Personal. For the individual, I care less about the management. I deeply care about the individual salesperson that's listening to this and their life as a whole. Because obviously sales, if you lose your job, huge knock-on effects with your family and everything else, of course.
Well, let me see if I can handle both perspectives, because I think both really reinforce the other. Because sometimes you need somebody standing from the outside to tell you what you might be doing wrong. But let's take it from a personal perspective. I mean, obviously, the hard metric, the empirical number is whether you're hitting your number or not. And I think when I was in sales, I mean, you like anything else, you look at what's in your pipeline. You look at what you're closing, you look at your sales cycle, you say, how much am I closing every month? So you're looking at the numbers, the hardcore numbers. And I think one of the things we have to do as salespeople sometimes is basically stop, we all know this, but really evaluate, I guess what we're doing wrong. And one of the things I like to suggest to those listening is that if you're struggling with selling right now, I want you to create like 4 categories in your head right now, real simple categories you can create. And that is, on the positive side, I want you to think about things you need to start doing, right? Just think about things you need to start doing. And also think about things that you are doing, but you should do more of. So start things you need to start doing. And if you're already doing them, maybe you need to do more of that. For example, more of that could be more cold calling, more social media marketing, maybe connecting more with people on, let's say, LinkedIn. Or if you haven't started yet, what do I need to start doing? That's on the positive side of what we can do, what's within our control. On the negative side, what are some of the things you need to stop doing? Do you know what I mean? Sometimes we just need to just stop doing certain things. And then also look at things that you're doing. Maybe you don't need to stop doing them, but maybe you need to do less of that. For example, maybe you're the type of person that checks their email every, half hour. Well, that's maybe something, you don't need to stop doing it, but maybe do less of. So I think that's a good way of starting, Bill. Do you know what I mean? Think about our daily activities, because that's what really drives everything else, right? You know that ABC, right? Our attitude drives our behavior, which drives our consequences, right? So I like to look at the behavior part, because I think that's where salespeople miss it sometimes.
So let's touch on this for a second, because you'll be able to add clarity to this, I'm sure, Victor. when you describe that, I think that's a process we can all go through, and it's probably not even a mental process. It's probably at the end of the show, or pause the episode if you've got a pad of paper in front of you, and you can write down these lists, and it gives you clarity. And you probably, whether you're successful or you're struggling, you should do this once a quarter, and there'll be real value in this. But that leads me on to the next step of implementing a lot of what we discover in this process. Do salespeople know what they need to be doing and then just don't do it? Or are they totally unaware of what they should be doing until they go through a process like this? And so they've got no chance in hell of ever putting it in place unless they become self-aware.
Well, okay, so I'm always about process and categories just because my brain thinks that way. I need to put things in buckets, right? And I think there's 3 types of salespeople, right? There's salespeople that should just not be in sales. Do you know what I mean? Just leave. Just get out of the game. You don't belong in sales. If you get up in the morning going, my God, here we go again, then just leave. You know what I mean? If you are that type of person, just leave. If you don't like selling, if there's a little person inside your head always questioning everything you're doing about selling, just leave. Go find another job, another profession. Just get out of selling, right? On the other end of the spectrum, we have people who simply know what to do. They're just pure hunters. You know what I mean? These are people who get up and they know what they need to do, and they'll figure it out. Like a Rubik's Cube, they'll just figure this thing out. They're so self-motivated because not only do they love helping people, but they love making a lot of money. That to me is the value for value, right? If I can give you value and make money in exchange for that, that I think is a win-win. Some people intuitively understand that. Now, right in the middle is this morass, right? Within the Gaussian distribution curve, the bell curve, there's this morass of people that we have to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff. They don't know if they should be in sales, they're thinking about it, they're doubting themselves, but maybe have some skills. Let's talk about these people. You know what I mean? Because some people know already they shouldn't be in sales, right? Okay. And by the way, I don't believe salespeople are born. I really believe that the majority of salespeople are made over time, because every industry requires a different, set of tools and skill sets. So I really believe that. Let's say that in the middle, there's this group, Will, and every day they're kind of struggling, not because they don't want to be successful, because they simply don't know where to begin, where to start, right? Have no idea. And they try a couple of things, and then when it doesn't work, they give up right away. And again, it's not that they're bad salespeople, it's that they don't have the tenacity or the perseverance to push through like the high-end people. The high-end people just push through. They accept the cliche, right? If I failed, I'll figure it out. My favorite story that I always tell is that one of my first jobs out of high school, or college rather, was working for Honeywell. I worked on a torpedo system. I'll make the story very brief, but it applies to the people in the middle. And that is, the torpedo goes after something, and when it isn't what it wants, it breaks off the attack, goes after something else again, it isn't what it wants, it breaks off the attack, so forth and so on, until it finally hits its target. Now, during that process, the torpedo updates its algorithm. It gets smarter, it gets better, right? That to me is a true salesperson. You go after something, a deal. Maybe the presentation didn't go right. You sucked at it, right? So you go back home and you go, okay, let me see. How can I fix this? What do I need to fix it? That's what the optimist will say, right? The positive person. The negative person will sit there and beat themselves up. I suck. I'm not good. I can't present. I'm horrible at selling. Boom, you're done. If that's how you think, you're done already. That's how you separate them real quick. If you're just totally down on yourself every time you do something wrong, you'll never be successful in sales. The people that succeed, that the people in the middle who want to move to the top, you go after something, you're never going to get it right. I've lost so many sales because I screwed up the presentation. I've lost so many sales because I said the wrong thing. I put a typo in the proposal or whatever that just threw the numbers off, right? Totally forgot a section, forgot to include in the proposal. I was out of there. I'm like, can I screw up anymore? But in my head, I was always thinking about the wins as well. I won a lot of deals along the way. So perseverance, tenacity, learning as you go is part of the routine of any average salesperson on their way to being a great salesperson.
So you touched on something there that I have suffered with in the past, both in sales and just in business in general, and that is making silly mistakes. And I see this as a separator between the kind of A players that I never was. I was kind of a B plus player. I'd always hit target, but I'd never really, dominate it. I'd never really crush it. But I was like safe bet for the manager kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I'd make lots of silly mistakes. So I was always confused in this as to whether it was, where were these mistakes coming from? Was it because I was trying to sabotage myself, so my psychology wasn't right? Was it just because I was rushing and not paying attention to these kind of things? Or is it that perhaps the A players that we are aspiring to get into that group, if possible, is it that they are just more detail oriented than the salespeople below them? What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, hell no. No way, Will. Let me tell you, a lot of these A players that you're calling are so ADHD. They screw so many things up, but they still find a way to compensate for that. So, no, I'm not going to go that these guys have never made mistakes. I can talk to A players today, and they'll give me their list of mistakes. You know what I mean? So I don't think that's it. I think it's all psychology. And I don't know if you're familiar with the book Learned Optimism, Dr. Martin Seligman, University of Pennsylvania. Interesting study. Basically, he talked about how we talk to ourselves basically determines our outlook, the pessimist versus the optimist. And without going into his whole study, basically he said this, that our self-talk, when something happens, will determine how we move forward. Here was the example. He gave it the 3 Ps, right? He says, when something goes wrong, the pessimist will say this. The first P will take personal. I stink, right? It's personal. He'll always make it permanent. This will never change, right? I'll always continue to screw up. The third one was pervasiveness. No matter what I try, no matter where I go, I just can't do this. That was the pessimist, right? That was the self-talk they had. I forgot the phrase he used, but it was a talking style that we use for ourselves. The optimist, on the other hand, when you look at their 3 Ps, the personal, like, oops, screwed that one. That's not good. Permanent. No, well, this happened this time, but typically that doesn't happen. So that just totally oversight. Pervasive. Does it happen anywhere I go? No, it's just when I do this. But everything else is really good. You see that, and that's the difference. That self-talk that he talks about in his book, Learned Optimism, really highlighted for me. So when I'm talking to somebody and they're down on themselves, I listen for those 3 Ps. Are they talking themselves down? Are they pervasive? Is it always permanent? Now, if you're a manager, how can you use this tool? Well, maybe even, by the way, you can even use this tool on yourself. What you have to do is what Seligman suggests is you have to challenge the premise. So, for example, you say to me, Victor, I stink with technology. I'm no good at technology. My challenge would be, really, Will, that's a nice laptop you have in front of you. Or I'll say, that's a really nice iPhone you have there. That's a piece of technology. So why is it that you can use that and you tell me you can't do this? And it's a simple example, but by challenging the premise of their belief system, you begin to shift their attitude, or at least make them aware that they're just pessimists. And some people can flip over, and become more positive in their mindset. And these are people who move into the top 20%. But then there's people who just can't. That's their mode, right? The fixed mindset, always negative. Those folks will always drop to the bottom and eventually leave sales.
So you've got optimists and you've got pessimists. It makes total sense. Optimists are going to be more successful. I think there's studies as well that show that optimists miss where they are aiming for more often, but then net win more because they take more risks and more chances and stuff. So I think, and it makes total sense from a gut feeling and from a common sense perspective, that an optimist is going to have more success in sales. But when you break down the optimist into 2 further chunks, how do the A players lie within this, or the people who are struggling, which is what we're talking about today? When you split it between the people who think they're going to win everything and go way over the top, and their predictions and their pipeline makes no sense because it's all way too optimistic, versus the people who think that they are going to win the business, but they are more grounded in reality. Is there a trait, or is one of those subgroups, do they perform better than the others?
Right. I think the super A players are really delusional optimists. You know what I mean? They always fall in that bracket. They're delusional. I mean, every optimist is delusional. We're so bad at predicting our future events. We're so off every time, as you put it, right? But I think what happens, if I were to separate the two, there's some people who I think, look, at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter, what typically happens, if you're too delusional, your numbers are not going to be there. And after a while, you're going to get slapped in the head by your manager a few times. You're going to cut it out. But then there's people who are very empirical, right? They like to do weighted probabilities on the deals of winning their sale, right? And I get those 2 philosophies. I think what separates the winners from the losers is that they simply know their accounts. Do you know what I mean? I can't emphasize that more. They know their business. I think what separates A players is that, one, they know the product. Do you know what I mean? They just by the way, when I say know the product, don't read the spec sheet. I mean, they know it well. Do you know what I mean? They've internalized it. They can eat it for breakfast type of thing. And then they also know the market. right? So, they know the product real well. They know the market. And I think when you know your product and you know your market, you walk in with a totally different attitude than, let's say, the average salesperson who kind of knows the products, kind of knows the market. And I've seen them. I've seen both of these at work. And people who really know their product really know the business. And then the third, if we can draw a Venn diagram on this, is customers. If you know your customers, for some reason, you just have better control over your numbers. You know what I mean? And again, you got to be a human BS detector to, make sure the customer's not lying about probability of you getting the deal. But I think that, when the book came out a couple of years ago, The Challenger Sale, I love the book because it was intuitively is what I already knew, that you had to challenge your customer, not just sit there and beg for business. Because of the internet, everything has changed. Because the internet, people have more information. Because of that, they're smarter, which means you, the salesperson, have to be smarter. But what if you can push the customer, question them, and make them, I guess, question how they're thinking? Those are the best salespeople. Those are the traits of the best salespeople. And I think it's those traits that allow them to always hit their number. Because they know when somebody's BSing them. They know when they're not going to buy from you. These people they're not afraid to lose the deal. Screw it, you're not going to buy from me. I get it. Later, I'm gone. They don't sit there and try to nurture a relationship that, is not going to produce anything. And again, one of the reasons I like the book, The Challenger Sale, is that highlighted that even in a complex sale, challenger salespeople actually win more deals than relationship salespeople. Now, this is not discounting that you have to have a nice relationship, but too often, let's go back to traits of losing salespeople. We focus on the relationship aspect without realizing that what customers really want is help making decisions because they're confused. And Will, you're a nice guy. You're a great salesman. I love you, man. But you know what? I'd rather go with Victor over here because he really gives me things to think about that you don't. And I think that's where selling has changed today. I think too many mediocre people focus on the relationship too much and don't emphasize challenging, pushing their customers and questioning what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, that's the easier route, isn't it? To put you're taking your ego and everything off the table when you just say, well, the relationship will happen. It's a long-term sell this. I've been there telling my sales manager the deal will come in another 6 months' time once they get all the kind of like ducks aligned and they need to transfer this money and stop this service. And yeah, you're totally spot on. A little bit of a push from your side.
And you're afraid to push them, right?
Yeah.
And you're afraid to push them, right? Well, you're afraid to push them. So you keep the customer told me that in another month they're going to make a decision. Or, yeah, the customer says this is going to be ready, within the next 2 weeks. Where the other type of salesperson is like, look, I'm not pushing you, but I'm pushing you. We need to make a decision. Are we going to do this or not? And I think that's definitely a trait of a great salesperson. They're not pushy. They're not aggressive, but they're demanding. As opposed to reacting, they're more proactive in pushing the sale forward.
Yeah, I mean, real practically, the way I used to implement this to force myself and force the customer to make a decision without being that pushy stereotype of the used car salesperson and using weird tactics and influence and manipulation techniques was I was just very open and honest of once I sold a medical device into a hospital theatre, I would then, because I was the account manager, I'd come in, I'd train the surgeons, I'd train the nursing staff, I'd take the equipment where it's going to be decontaminated and sterilized, and I'd train the staff there. And I just was very open and honest of these are the dates in my diary where I can come in and commission the equipment once it's been sold. If you do not buy within the next, if the purchase order isn't sorted within the next 2-3 days, you can buy it in the next 6 months, but it's going to be another 8 months before I can come in and work with you. So that's how I hacked that process of being forceful, but being open and honest as well. And and you can have different styles on this as well, which is probably a deeper conversation and a conversation for another time. But you said something here which I want to come back to. So there's going to be people listening to the show now that go, okay, it all makes total sense. I'm leaving sales, but they've only been doing it for 2 weeks, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. And so to know the customers, to know the product, to know the market, it takes time to have the experience. It takes time no matter how naturally talented you are. So Victor, how do we know, again, the salespeople listening to this who aren't having perhaps crazy success, but how do they know whether they've got the potential to have the success once they've got a bit more experience and a bit more just simply time behind them?
Well, I think, the good news about, yes, it takes time to gain that experience. The good news in that piece of information is that you should give yourself a little bit of, I guess, breathing room and not be so autocritical of yourself, because you know what? It does take time. Some people have been in the industry 5, 10 years, and they know the industry. You just started out, you're in 2 to 3 months, and you're not hitting your number. So at this point, let me know if I'm answering your question well. You need to evaluate, first of all, do you even like what you're doing over there? Because in 2 to 3 months, you know whether you like the industry or not. Do you know what I mean? By the way, I never say you have to love what you sell, but you really have to love what it does for your customers. And that's a very subtle difference, because I hear all these gurus saying, you got to love what you sell. I'm like, no, I don't have to love what I sell. I have to love what it does for my customers. And so the salesperson should ask themselves over the next 2 or 3 months, you're going through this process, do I enjoy selling this? Do I see the benefits? Even if I haven't closed enough deals, but I really enjoy selling this because I see the impact it has on my customers. And if you see that, that's the energy that drives you. Okay, I'm gonna figure this damn thing out. I'm going to figure out what the process is to sell more effectively. And then do what I do. I cheated, right? You go with the sales experts, people who know. You don't know how many times, I asked people who were killing their numbers, tell me what you're doing. No, seriously. Walk me through the process. Can I go with you on a sales call? Can I record it? Remember back in the day, I had little audio recorders on tape, and I used to record this stuff because I wanted to hear the pitch. I wanted to see how they behaved in front of the customers. And so that's one way of shortcutting, I guess, shortening the learning curve, is to really do that. By the way, role playing. I can't believe, I ask this question all the time, in my sales training programs or when I'm speaking, how many people do role playing? 1% of the audience, maybe 2 if I'm generous. And I'm like, the worst thing you want to do is practice in front of your customer. And we don't do it because it feels awkward, Will. You know what I mean? It feels awkward. But here's what I like to remind people. You spent, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks setting up a meeting, right? And then you spent, I don't know, how much time and money and effort just trying to make that meeting happen. Maybe you had to fly to the location, whatever it may be. And the last thing you want to do after spending all that time, effort, and money is to actually sit there and practice in front of the customer. And so most salespeople suck at their pitches. Their presentations are horrible. They do the basic dog and pony. They should need to get a better pitch. 2, they don't know how to have a conversation. Sometimes it feels like the Spanish Inquisition because they're asking questions without engaging the customer. You know this stuff well. And they simply do not know enough to have an engaging conversation. So in a nutshell, get back to knowing your product, know what the customer wants to hear, have that conversation.
Flipping this on its head for a second, Victor.
Sure.
How much, for the salespeople who've been in the same industry for 5 to 10 years, and obviously then beyond that, and I've got a story that I can share on this as well, but for those people, how big is the upside of, whether you're in the same company or not, but the same industry, how big is the upside of that amount of experience, even if you're not trying to, it's going to happen naturally, of that much networking within the industry? How much easier does it make sales at that point? Because, and I'll share a story in a second perhaps, but how much easier does it make it for just sticking it out that little bit longer and pushing through any doubt and negativity you've got and just kind of getting on with it?
Use the analogy that everybody uses, right? The plane, right? It exercises a lot of energy just trying to get to that, to a certain level, and at 30,000 feet, it levels off. That's what selling is. When you're in the game for, let's say, 3 years, and I'll use that as the magic number, because at the 3-year mark, you now know your product, your service, you know the players, you know the industry. Well, now it's almost like it comes more naturally to you. Then another level of cognitive behavior kicks in. Now that you got the basics out of the way, now you start thinking strategically how to position yourself in the future with some of these companies. So the answer is, it becomes a whole hell of a lot easier, especially when you know a lot, when you know more people, and all of a sudden you know the answers to the questions. You know what I mean? So when you're walking in and having that conversation with the customer, isn't that struggle to just try to have that natural conversation? It flows naturally because of your experience. So yes, definitely, if you hang in there, the benefits, the upside, the commissions, if I might add that, are exceptional.
Yeah, I mean, there's one guy at the last company I worked for, and he semi-retired, and he had some, some terrible events happen at home. So he came back to kind of get away from the home stuff, And in case he ever listens to this episode, I'm going to go on the younger side of things, but he must have been, 60, 65, 70 or so. So older than the majority of the sales reps that were 25 to 35. And he would come in, and he'd been in urology, selling urology products for 40 years at this point. I think it was his first job with the company that ended up buying the subsidiary that we then worked for post that kind of acquisition. And I think that's all right history-wise, not that it's totally all that relevant, but he had 40 years in the industry. He knew the surgeons who are now 45, 50 from when they were trainees, and he looked after them then, and he's looked after them for this period for so long that they now see him as like an older uncle kind of character. And there was events that we'd almost bring, we'd leverage him as a sales tool as opposed to a rep who's proactively selling. And we'd bring him in, and you'd see all the older surgeons who, not the age that matters, but the fact that they're older through the training than the registrars, then through the trainees down the kind of food chain. The older surgeons would then bring in the registrars to come and spend time with him. And he would literally, and it was fantastic, and I would sit in awe of him on a number of occasions when he would do this. He would literally come in and just tell stories to the registrars about how the surgeons that they looked up to did stupid things, obviously, without putting anyone at risk of being sued post the fact. But he would tell them all the stupid things that they all did when they were 20. And obviously, he was taking them out like for drinks and that, in the medical device sales way.
You got to do that. By the way, good point. You got to do that.
Yeah.
You got to do that.
And he would tell all these stories, and everyone would be captivated. And the next thing, I would get a load of business. Just from his relationships with people. And so he didn't really have a territory. I don't really know. No one really knew what his job was other than to come and entertain all the surgeons and obviously add value to our, and I don't know if he's incentivized or anything like that, but he'd add value to our relationships by us being associated with him. And he was a great guy. Obviously, it all ties together. If he was a complete arsehole, it wouldn't work. He was a really good guy, really, you would want to spend time with him. And so we'd bring him and he'd be on my patch, say, like 2 or 3 times a year, and everyone would love him. And the point of me telling that tale was, if he had a territory, every single surgeon on that territory would know who he is. They would all buy from him, no matter what the price is, and he would literally go around just having coffee with people. He would not have to do any selling. He would not have to do any negotiations. Everything would fall into place for him. So 40 years is a long time.
Everybody knew what he had to offer. My similar story, and I think it'll benefit your listeners, is that about 5 or 6 years ago, technology company, had an interesting problem, Will. They had this guy, his name is Larry, right? He's here in Georgia. And Larry is about 65 easy, right? Much like your surgeon friend, right? And he's one of these backwood country, not smooth around the edges, hard, just that, he's got a lot of rough edges. Well, the problem was that Larry was outselling the other salespeople 10-1. He was outselling 10 salespeople. And so the company wanted to figure out, what was Larry doing? And so the problem is they try to get Larry to train the salespeople, but when they told Larry, hey, can you train salespeople? He's like, well, Victor, the way I train, I just go in there and talk to the customer, and just really engage the customer, and that's all I do. So they were kind of like, I guess miffed. They didn't know what to do. So they called me and says, Victor, can you hang out with this guy for like a week or two, follow him around, and document what he does? True story. So I follow this guy around, by the way, selling technology companies into telecommunication companies, right? And so I'll give you one simple example. It's similar to your story, just dead on. He walks into a central office somewhere back in LJ, backwoods, Georgia here. And I'm walking in, and we're walking through the central office where they got all the equipment, right? Telecom equipment, right? And he said, he's walking through this, says, yep, I know what that is. He's talking to the supervisor, right? And then he says something like this. You got to bleep this part out. He goes, where'd you get that piece of shit? I was like, and my jaw nearly fell to the ground because I was like, did he just say that? And the guy just, yeah, we regretted buying that. And the guy just kept following. Yeah. They loved the guy because, as you say, he knew the product, he knew the market, and everybody within his geographic area knew who he was and understood that he had that straightforwardness because, that's one of the things I think Will today's missing. we were not straightforward. You know what I mean? We try to kind of massage the truth a little bit. He was so in your face, you just knew where he stood. And I think that was quite a characteristic he had. It was great.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, there's a lot more that ties into that of being a super straight talker. I know for me personally, I have had this where, rightly, wrongly, my perception of it could have been right or wrong, but for example, my age, when I was first in medical device sales, if I was to say something like that, it would come across disrespectful perhaps to the surgeons.
Right.
Whereas this other chap that I'm on about, he could say whatever he liked and with a big cheesy grin on his face, and he'd get away with it. And he wasn't particularly being cheeky, which is obviously a tactic, and some people can get away with that. Being in the UK, we call it having banter with people or taking the mick. He wasn't necessarily doing that. He was just super up straight, but because he's such a gentle and soft and nice guy with these deep relationships, he can say whatever he likes. So I guess where I'm going at with this is I wanted to come away with a couple of takeaways for the audience. One of which you've outlined a whole bunch of personality traits that is putting you at such a disadvantage in sales that I think you need to reassess it. In your words, you need to kind of not be in sales if if your world is tied up in pessimism and things of that nature. Then I think what we've done is, if you, as you described, if you like sales, you like selling the product, or at the very minimum, you like the end result of the product for the customer, there's perhaps some barriers that you can break through with better customer kind of like experience and relationships, with product knowledge, with market knowledge, with just knowledge of the industry in general. There's probably slight hurdles you can overcome, and it's worth pushing through. And then what I wanted to kind of touch on as well, which you did perfectly there, Victor, was that there's such an upside when you do push through, when you stick at it. There's such an upside. That 3-year number that you put out there, I agree with as well. And then from that 3 to 5 to 6 to kind of like decade, I think it just becomes easier. I think sales becomes a real pleasure at that point versus the kind of hustle and the rejection and everything else that comes along with it otherwise. But there's one thing that we haven't touched on, which I do want to touch on. What other benchmarks should we be measuring ourselves against in sales? Is it as simple as you should like what you're selling and you should be hitting target? Or should we be enjoying sales? Or should sales be the means to the end, even perhaps, if I can put it that way, of it's all right to have to work really hard during the day so that sales affords you the opportunity and the cash flow to do whatever you want else in the evening. What else should we be measuring here other than just hitting target and enjoying selling the product?
I think the all the other benefits, obviously, we make more money, we're going to enjoy our lives, quality of life, all that. Okay, let's push that aside. That's the given, right? The question is, how do we measure ourselves? If we're struggling right now, I'm putting myself in that position, right? I'm struggling. So I need something that tells me whether I have forward momentum or not, right? And I go back to the sales process. You just can't get away from it. So let's say that my sales process has 7 steps, right? Set up the meeting, or prospect, set up the meeting, have the first presentation, do a follow-up with a demo, get the product approval, so forth and so on. What I used to do is I used to have a matrix, right? So I took my top 10 clients, maybe sometimes 15, but top 10 clients, and then in a matrix form across the top column, right, I would have my process laid out, right? First call, first meeting, first demo, first field trial, first product approval, proposal sent in the system, right? And then what I would do is I would literally X out. Before CRMs were available, right? I would just X out that box. And it was a visual representation of my progress on these accounts. And I would put the start date when I first started contacting the customer, and I would sit there. And I think that's still valuable, whether you do it in a CRM system like Salesforce or not. But how do you keep track of how you're making progress? Because sometimes we wake up in the morning and you're like, or at the end of the day, rather, we say, did we get anything done today? And if I can cross out one box, that to me is forward progress. And that keeps me motivated, right? We do this today, right? Well, sometimes at the end of the day, we go, what did we do today? What did we get done? And my whole philosophy is, did I move the ball forward? Do you know what I mean? I don't care if it's an inch, 2 inches, a yard. Did I move it forward? And I think having some way of measuring that, well, keeps you mentally in the game.
I love this. So this is something that I've implemented with the podcast recently, because it was kind of getting on top of me, the amount of content that we were putting out. The process wasn't aligned of the video comes in, it goes off to a video editor, it comes back, the audio gets edited, all this kind of stuff. And it was not that I was demotivated, but it was only, as you kind of described then, it was only every 3 or 4 days when a show would be finished, I'd be like, I've achieved something today. Whereas I'm still hustling crazy hours, more than I ever did when I worked in sales, every single day to make that end product happen. But I wasn't loving the fact that I couldn't see the progress. So very super crazy simple as your example then. I just split everything up into separate folders on this new storage solution that we've got here of it goes this, it does this, the video gets edited, it comes back. So I can now see these videos go through essentially the processing funnel, if we want to call it that. So now at the end of every day, I can see, 12 hour-long conversations in tomorrow are going to be published, because today I did all the kind of recording the intros and the outros and all the stuff that's not really that fun, sitting here and on my own in a room kind of recording all this stuff that just sits either at the end of the videos, but I can see that progress. So I like this. So can we wrap up the show with this, Victor, that if you're struggling in sales, what you need to do is you need to assess where you are. You need to have a pipeline review, perhaps, if we can call it that. You need to know whether you've got a process in place and I think a visual way of, whether it's on a CRM, whether it's a piece of paper, whatever it is, a process of seeing visually your progress with each account. We need to have a focus on improving our customer relationships, product knowledge, and market knowledge. And you need to at least like the end result of the product for your customer, not necessarily the product. For example, if you're selling accounting software, is the example I always use, but you can get excited that the accountant is going to make more money and have success because of that. If we've got all these aligned and we're still miserable, is it safe to say then that you're struggling because you're just not suitable for sales?
I'll say yes, but with a little asterisk. If you're going to be, the asterisk would be that, like anything else, this is an iterative process, right? Just like the torpedo analogy, it's an iterative process. And as you're going through this and you're seeing that you're not progressing, you have to make a choice. I need help. Where do I get it? Or I just quit. You know what I mean? And if my mind leads towards finding help, great. Find somebody who can help you. Find a mentor, whether it's a virtual mentor, physical mentor, find somebody. But I guess, I love sales so much. I don't want people to drop out. You know what I mean? Well, I really want them to make sure that they've given it all they've got before they go, you know what, I just did the checklist that Victor and Bill talked about. That's not for me. Not so fast. Maybe there's something in your process, as you put it, that you just haven't gotten down. And now it's time to go ask somebody or get some advice. So before you decide to drop out, go get some advice. Somebody who's blunt with you, and they'll tell you, either you suck or you don't suck. And then figure it out from there. Okay,
I'm going to ask you one final question on this, and it's going to be quite a tough question to answer, perhaps.
Sure.
So that checklist, clearly you can reiterate and improve and change things around and get excited, get motivated, have a process, and it takes time to put that in place anyway. So if you've only been selling for 2 weeks and you don't like it, it's probably worth sticking it out for at least a couple of months. I appreciate that. But when is the cutoff? Because I don't want my audience to disappear after this show, of course. But I do think there's a lot of people in sales who are miserable. They are trapped because they are used to a certain amount of cash coming in, and they live, rightly or wrongly. It's a discussion for another conversation about living to your means and that kind of thing. But I know sales professionals who have the nice car, who have the big mortgage that they have to pay every month, that have all the nice things, that are living, to their means and perhaps slightly beyond, that are not suitable for sales. They are miserable. They hate it. And selling that car and getting out of sales would make a huge difference to their life. And it's one thing for me to, tell them directly and have those conversations as, my best friends kind of thing. But it's another one for the audience listening to this who don't have that deeper level of rapport and trust with both of us. So what I'm asking you here is, how long do we need to give it before we make a real, draw a line in the sand, get out or commit? How long does it take to have all this in practice, real practically for the audience, Victor, and they can make this decision? Because there's going to be a small percentage of people who are going to listen to this and they're going to both email us and thank us for pushing them out of sales, and then they find something that they love doing and it's life-changing for them?
Okay, so I'm going to assume that no hard numbers, no vacillating here. 3 months. At 3 months, you should have an indication of whether you should be in or out, you like this or not. And you should have also closed at least one big deal, okay? And you feel comfortable saying, I think I kind of got this. At the end of the 6 months, you should be able to say to yourself, I think I can make a living off of this, right? Because I can see my numbers going up. At the end of the year, evaluate your revenue and whether you like the business or not. So if you like the business, great. Maybe the revenue isn't there, but maybe you can adjust it. But if you're so far off, then just quit. Just either quit sales or find another product to sell, because maybe it's the product. What I also say is that, you mentioned the people who have the big cars and are miserable in selling. That's pure ego. So, again, if you're driven by ego, that's just a personal problem. That's a personality flaw. But I think I just started this job. In 3 months, I got my first sale. And by the way, if you're a great sales manager, you will work to make your salespeople close deals as soon as possible, because there's nothing like getting that first one, right? I worked with the company Cigna, the healthcare company. They try to have their people, their telesales people, have success, or at least to close their first deal within 1 month. And I love that because that builds momentum. So if you can close, let's say, 1 or 2 deals in 3 months, man, that's an indication that maybe you're going to be good at this. Maybe you're still not able to pay off your mortgage, right? You can't live on that yet, but you're getting there. At 6 months, I think that's when I would evaluate it again and say, okay, so where are the numbers now? Did I close 3 to 5 or 10 more deals? Do I see that trending line? And then at the end of the year, by the way, the 6 months would be my cutoff, whether I like to do this or not. Do I like this company? Do I like this product? And are the numbers where I'm at? 6 months, Will, that's what I'm giving you.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the firm numbers. And you touched on something brilliant then, which I'll wrap up the show with, in that if you've not had that one success yet, I know for me, the longer sales cycles in medical device sales, it could be like 12 months, 18 months before everything aligns, because some of the deals I was doing were multi-million pound deals. But that big win for me, and it's the neurochemicals, it's everything else going on in the brain, it's the excitement, makes all the crap beforehand totally worth it. So if you hadn't experienced that, and then you're aiming towards the next one, which might be months down the line, you perhaps prematurely quitting. So I appreciate that. And Victor, I've got one final question for you, mate. Something I ask everyone that comes on the show. You answered it last time, so I'm going to ask you again. If you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
This time I say, be patient. Is that what I said last time? Be more patient with yourself. Allow yourself to make mistakes. It's okay. Adjust, move forward.
Amazing. Victor, tell us a little bit more where we can find out about you, for everyone who's excited about our conversation today and wants to learn more. And mention specifically your YouTube channel as well, because there's a lot of great content on there.
I have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/sales influence. That's the channel. But if you just type in Victor Antonio, you'll find it. My main website is victorantonio.com. There you'll find courses. And also we have a sales mastery intensive workshop that we're now offering. Next one is in February. So information's online about that as well.
Amazing stuff. We'll link to all that in the show notes to this episode over at salesman.red. And Victor, thank you again for your company, mate. Thank you for the conversation. And
always.
And again, I genuinely hope this, mate. I hope that there's a couple of people who's going to email us both who this may be a hard thing for them to hear, but they do decide to move away from sales. And there's going to be plenty more that go, oh, fine, I'll struggle on for another 6 months and then they'll have success. But I'm less focused on them. I'm more focused on the few that this could have a real impact on, and it could really be game-changing for them in their careers and their happiness levels. So I think, I know there's going to be value in this for just that small segment are going to get proportionally more than what everyone else will.
Can I add one note? Because I know this is going to come back to haunt us, okay? So I want to make sure I got this one covered.
Of course.
And that is, when I talk about 3 months and, the 6 months, I'm assuming that maybe a sales cycle of 1 month to 2 months is what it takes to close a deal.
Sure.
Obviously, if it's a complex sale and let's say it takes 6 months to close a deal, well, maybe your first measurement point should be 6 months. So again, it really depends on the sales cycle. So I'm assuming a 1 month sales cycle, and at the end of 3 months, you should have closed at least one deal.
Yeah, totally agree. That makes total sense. And with that, Victor, I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you again, Will.